So today we're heading into emotional behaviors, chapter 12. I'm going to quickly go through this. There is a lab that I've added, and and you don't know about it because I just uploaded the last file to it, and but it's kind of a fun lab, I hope, and I hope they've all been that way. And so let's take a quick look at chapter 12 here. And here's in our course book. And we start off, of course, with a discussion about one of the applications of studying emotions, of course, is emotional intelligence, which have either one of you heard of that before? Emotional intelligence. It comes up in intro to psych. I think it's in the developmental psych class as well. And it's actually, what's his name? Gold something. The guy who he came out with a book. He didn't discover emotional intelligence. We've actually known about emotional intelligence for quite some time, but the ability, in our case here, for the frontal cortex to manage the amygdala, basically the frontal cortex, that executive decision making part of our brain, managing the amygdala, which is sort of the id. It's the selfish, this is what I want, this is, somebody just insulted me, I need to post something on Facebook. That part of our brain, our ability to manage that and be able to also recognize and manage emotions in other people, has actually been connected to success. And I'll define that in just a second, more than IQ, intelligence quotient, the ability to manage people. And certainly as we look at our, most jobs now, you're working with people. There's not as many manufacturing jobs where you don't need to have emotional intelligence as much. And success, Daniel Goldberg, something like that. That's his name. He interviewed very successful people. He had one of those, gigs where he just got to interview all kinds of successful people, and he defined success, everything from a successful father to Bill Gates. And so it was related to all of that. So it's very, very powerful. I actually had the opportunity to see him speak one time. He was speaking at USM. And I went down and it was like, oh, this is going to be cool. It's all about emotional intelligence. And he has left that topic behind. And his whole talk was about people doing well in nursing homes. So he had moved right on. This is old news to him, but it's still very, very, very important recent stuff. And we see this little wheel right here, this emotional intelligence, self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal skills, decision-making, stress management. If you're good at that stuff, you're going to be you're going to be a successful person. And then you can actually, I put in there from Psychology Today magazine, they actually have an online test. So if you want to go and take that and face the reality of your own emotional intelligence, you can do that. Now, back to the course here in terms of understanding emotions. Emotions have actually been, personality and emotions are actually the trait, personality, how we normally are, kind of patterns of our behavior, and state, meaning these are very fluid or plastic, as they call it. They go up and down during the day. Those two areas have been the focus of psychology since the beginning, since the philosophies that are the origins of psychology. So, why do I do what I do? And it's both a function of my traits and a function of how I'm feeling that day. And then, of course, social psychology came along later on and said, wait a minute, it kind of depends where you are and who you're with. And so those elements of understanding human behavior were really the focus of psychology all along. And so we have some existing theories that are not so much per se biopsych, but trying to understand that relationship between when we see something, let's say, or we experience something and there's an emotion that we have, how do we actually recognize that? And the book goes over three primary theories. It's missing one of them, and I'll put it at the end. It might be missing it because it's going away. I'm not sure. Our book is a little dated, so I'm not sure if that's because it's a free book. I figured dated was fine, and not sure if this theory is on its way out. But nonetheless, the James Lang theory basically says that when we experience, let's say, a growling bear as we're walking along. Oh, let's just make this relevant. Has anybody seen that video about the guy that was on the trail and he got tagged by the mountain lion? It's yeah, there's this, and he's walking backwards, kind of thing, and the mountain lion follows him for almost a mile, and they have the whole video because he came upon the cubs, and so there's been all kinds of commentary on that. But so here, this guy, he comes upon the cubs. I mean, he's just walking along. It's a road up in the woods. Comes along the cubs, and he takes a picture of the cubs, and mom comes bounding out, get away from my kids, and he starts backing out. So when we think about that guy's emotions when he's experiencing that mountain lion, which could literally kill him, how did the emotional experience happen? And the James Lang theory says that our right at the level of our physiology recognizes our brain, of course, but it sends messages to our physiology that says, there's danger in front of you. I'm going to start the fight or flight response. And then our brain recognizes my heart's beating, blood's flowing, I'm sweating. I must be scared. And so it's this physiology tells the brain what is going on. Now, this happens incredibly rapidly. So you're looking at microseconds in terms of, and they're just trying to figure out, the chicken before the egg. What happens first? Does your heart rate start going and then you recognize it as fear, or is it something else? Now, Cannon-Bard comes along and he says, no, these things happen exactly at the same time. And they say, our brain, like the input goes in, and if we think about the pathways that we've been talking about in terms of visual pathways, particularly the visual pathway, because I used seeing a bear as the visual pathway, where we have the ventral and dorsal pathways, and how we use that to evaluate the presence of danger, that we're doing that while at the same time the signals of potential danger are already going. And the reason why we react so fast, let's say we jump, like we turn around and we have the sense that we jump before we even can kind of even say mountain lion, and because they're happening at the same time. So that's the Cannon-Bard theory. And then we have the Schachter-Singer theory that says, yes, these things are happening at the same time, but cognition and that, like I said, that ventral and parietal pathways, those two pathways in our brain, that we actually come to a very fast conclusion. Our brain comes to a conclusion very quickly. This is a mountain lion. Mountain lions are in those category of animals I don't want to run into. It's this far away. It's looking at me. It's following me. And we do this very, very rapidly. And that's how we experience emotion. Now, the interesting one that I was exposed to early on, it's kind of a weird one, is facial muscle experience. That when we see something and we're scared, our facial muscles, which are connected to, very, very closely connected to our amygdala, inform us as to what our emotion is. I've always thought that was a little odd. That our facial muscles would respond first, and then we kind of interpret, like I'm like this, and that means I'm scared. I didn't buy it. I was in intro to psych, and I raised my hand. I said, that doesn't make any sense. I didn't even like psychology then anyway. So, okay, so moving in terms of gross parts of the brain, meaning large aspects of the brain, not the yucky parts. there are different contributions from the left and right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is considered the activating part of the hemisphere. This is the one that wants to go to action, and the right hemisphere is a inhibiting. So it's that kind of mechanism between interpreting from on the left hemisphere is like, I need to now we don't necessarily have to talk about fear. We can talk about any emotion. Let's say we see someone that we don't like, and we want to yell at them and call them a name. And so our left hemisphere gets the name ready. Let's get the timing. Let's get the camera going. We're going to film it and post it on Facebook, and stuff like this. And it's the right hemisphere that says, hey, wait a minute. Maybe the right hemisphere has a little bit to do with emotional intelligence and says, hey, wait a minute. Is this really the way you want to go? It's the reins on somebody's, what they would say. So you probably have experienced that. Maybe I can get you to talk a little bit. Have you ever experienced a time where you wanted to say something in response to somebody else's stupidity, let's say, and you stopped yourself from doing it? Okay, Jordan, you're emphatically
happens all the time.
Can you tell me about that?
But I have like a certain experience. Like in high school, I would see people like bully each other, and I want to say something so bad, but I never did.
Yep.
Or sometimes I would.
Yeah, but wasn't it? And what I'm going to tell you about that. So the left part of your brain, you knew exactly what you wanted to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, you might have even like walked away and rehearsed it a little bit. Like, had
Yes.
And so you see this sort of complete processing that happens in the left part of the brain that says, this is what we're going to do. This is the plan. This is what we're going to say. Get ready. And then your right brain came along and said, don't do this.
Yep.
And you're sitting there going, and then you get in your car, drive away, and you're talking to yourself for at least 10 minutes about that.
Yeah. And you wish you said it.
Yeah, and wish you had said it. But then,
Yeah.
well, see, the danger of windshield talk and then fulfilling that is that usually, and this is where the left brain goes awry, and this is not biopsych, this is more psychology, is the left brain fills in the entire script or how this conversation would go. And anybody who's, well, I'll ask Jaden here, have you ever been on your way, and I'm scripting this question, have you ever been on your way to what you know is going to be a confrontation? Like, here's what I have to say. I'm gearing up, and you get there, and as you're practicing, you know what they say, that if your windshield could talk, you would be in jail. So you're on your way to this confrontation, and you get there, and you're like, okay, and you make the statement, and it doesn't go as planned. Jaden, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I with my mom a lot, actually. Like, you hear all yeah, sometimes I think I just want to tell her right off, and then I'm like, she's probably it's not gonna be good.
And you're like, I rehearsed this the whole time over. Your line is this. You're supposed to say, oh my God, my dear, I am so sorry. I didn't realize that offended you. What can I do? What can I bake to make you feel happier? That's what they were supposed to say. What the left hemisphere does is it writes the whole script. What the right hemisphere knows is that script didn't get mailed out to the other person. So they're not necessarily bound to those responses so when we plan out these conversations, so like in therapy, sometimes I've had to work with people to say, okay, you're planning this conversation, but you have to be ready for any answer. You might not get the one, like I said, if I'm helping somebody develop a plan to confront somebody, they have to plan for answers that are unexpected. And then that's how you can survive emotionally through a conversation like that. So cool. So those are the parts of our brain, a little bit of that. Another part of our brain, of course, I've already said it, the amygdala and the basically the entire limbic system here. We have the basal ganglia in control of movements, learning, habits, cognitions, and emotions. These are the ways in which we physiologically react. The thalamus in terms of energizing our body when we have emotional situations. The hypothalamus controlling that balance, the balance things. Amygdala, this is kind of where the emotional responses live. It's colored green on here. And then the hippocampus, memory and navigation. And it's interesting, for example, to know the relationship between physiological state and emotions. So if we just spent some time talking about the drives like hunger and thirst. And here we have in this emotional, organization inside of our brain, that the part of our brain, the hypothalamus, is responsible for that balancing of hunger and thirst and all that. And we know that when that's imbalanced, we tend to have less emotional control. So when you're hungry, have you ever been hangry? Do you know what hangry is? When you're hungry and angry at this, and it's really in the I'll just jump to it, in the addiction world. If somebody's one of the problems with addiction is it is a response to an emotional state that someone is in. And the problem with a person who has an addiction is that whatever they're addicted to is probably, it's a stimulus that negates the emotional experience. So first and foremost, it's effective. It works. If I'm feeling a certain way and that's uncomfortable to me, and I go and have a drink, the drink will make it go away. The drink is very effective. So the bottom line is it's very effective in dealing with those emotions. The other part of the problem is that the individual has learned that one way of dealing with those emotions is the most effective, and they don't have what we would call a repertoire of behaviors, different things that they can do when they're angry. So within the addiction community, they identify 4 emotional states that are most common lead to a person choosing to, let's say, drink. And it's hunger, anger, loneliness, and tired. And that acronym means HALT, HALT. And within that, so those emotions, like somebody's hungry, we see that, that's going to make it worse. That's going to make the addiction worse. They're angry. That's an emotion that is, to me, it's probably the most important emotion to study, but yet it's one of the emotions that people really shy away from because it can be scary when it leads to violence and aggression. We don't really study it a lot, and yet it's an incredibly, we better get our, right now we're looking at post-election, we're looking at some pretty pissed off people. And we really need to understand that anger and frustration in order to support those people, and so it doesn't get to the point of violence. And then we have loneliness, which is it's a combination of fear and anger, depending on why they're lonely. It's a complex emotion. I'm alone. I'm fearful that I'm going to be alone forever. I'm alone. She or he left me. It's her fault. it's a self-esteem, I'm not worthy, those kind of things. It's a very, very complex emotion. And then of course being tired. And each one of these contributes to relapse. And so we see that part of the brain here in the hypothalamus being important. It's connected, right there, that area of the brain is connected to the amygdala, to the basal ganglia, to the thalamus and the hippocampus and all that stuff. It's very, very integrated in that. So those physiological things play an important role. And I guess maybe that kind of gives us a little bit of support for the James Lang theory. If I have a physiological state already going on, I'm already hungry, it's going to shape my emotional response. So there we go. We get this kind of support for that particular model, that, the irritating thing that might have normally produced and just a slight irritation pisses you off, because, if your computer breaks down and you haven't had lunch yet, it's worse. And so we have these interacting systems in the brain. Now, in the course book, I then go in, this is actually something it's a little side project that I want to do. I actually want to write a little book about the movie Inside Out. There were about 40 psychologists that consulted on this movie. Have you ever seen it? Oh man. That's an assignment, Jordan. You need to watch this movie. Inside Out is a portrayal of the inner workings of the emotional mind of a young girl who loves where she's living in a small town. Her parents are forced to move to a city for a new job, and she's going through adolescence and her emotional things going, haywire. And it's a incredibly accurate portrayal of how emotions interact with one another. And they look at these 5 key emotions of sadness, joy, fear, disgust, and anger. And even at the beginning, as the movie starts, with the kid being very young, just having just been born, and the only emotion that's present is joy. And then sadness comes along, and there's like kind of a initial, like, joy doesn't want sadness around, but sadness is going to be there because the baby's hungry, and all of these are very, very cool. And the entire lab in which the control room that they're in is representative of the limbic system. And there's controls where you see the emotions are kind of fighting with each other, and the different emotions. It's a very, very, very cool movie that way. And then it goes into a lot of stuff about memories. And there's one area in the movie that really displays the hippocampus very well. And hippocampus, as in the other graphic, was responsible for memories. And memories that have emotions attached to them are particularly clear, or can be particularly clear. So we have in the movie, there's a time you see, here's the control room, and then you have all the emotions here. And this little light that's portraying the movie is really sort of the movie's hippocampus going, remember this? And the coloring of it shows that it's in the past, it has that sepia coloring to it. And it's an emotional experience. And the different characters respond to that very similar to the way our amygdala responds to our hippocampus. And so this stuff is actually really, really kind of neat. And there's a little movie that I included there, the neuroscience of Inside Out. It's a person has gone down this path a little more, and I actually would like to pick up where he left off and put more material together on this movie, because it is actually incredibly well done. So we have the different emotions here, those basic emotions and how they develop and how they interact with each other. We have anger here that gets portrayed in the movie, and we also have fear and anxiety, how it gets portrayed. And I talk about these in terms of a neurological basis for that. So, so a cool movie. So really, if you have a chance to see it, it actually is a very, very fun movie. It's a Pixar, Disney, and probably second only, in my opinion, in terms of great animated films, second only to The Emperor's New Groove, which I think is the best. That's the best movie almost ever. So, okay, then we get into stress, and we look at the parts of the body that that register stress, and these are emotional responses. We have alarm and resistance and exhaustion. These are aspects of stress, and the actual effect of prolonged stress. And we're looking really at kind of stuff like burnout. And actually, I probably should put that link out there. There's a syndrome called stress fatigue, and stress fatigue is a part of what we were facing, certainly throughout the fall here, was we were facing a number of different crises that were going on. We have existing crises prior to COVID included economic things and global climate change, racial tension. We have the pandemic comes along with educational challenges. Some people lost their jobs, lost their incomes, lost their health insurance. Then we have this election, and it's contentious, and some very big issues that are very important to people, like abortion and healthcare and whatnot, are sort of on the table again. And add all that up, and you actually enter into there's a syndrome in which people, when you're burned out of work, it's a little easier to contend with. It's like, okay, I need to make changes at work. And that traditional way in which people would address work is to establish areas that they can control. Almost the serenity prayer. Again, I'm going to draw from the addiction world. Are you familiar with the serenity prayer? It's Jordan, you need to get into this stuff here.
I know, I guess so.
Well, this is great. You're learning about them here. So the serenity prayer goes, God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that becomes a kind of a mantra. We often experience stress because we spend a lot of time trying to change things that we have no control over, like somebody else's behavior. And so the lesson in that serenity prayer is to focus on the things you can change and the things that you can have control over, because when you do that, your stress level goes down because you actually have control over something. You can make change. There's a whole theory by a guy named William Glasser called control theory, and he goes ape on that, and it's just about how important that is for people to feel control in their lives. Now, add all these things. Look at Black Lives Matter, look at the pandemic, look at, being forced to go online for everything, and look at the election, and look at how those circumstances might actually change your life. And all of these things seem so distant and out of our control. One of the efforts that actually is exemplified in this election, a success in this election, again, regardless of how it's turned out, is under the circumstances of so many stresses, it's kind of like getting burned out of work, but you're burned out of life. Probably can relate to that. It's like everything's crap. Wherever I turn, I'm getting reminded of this crap that's going. It's not just at work. It's not like you have this home to go to. It's everywhere. That would lead, under normal circumstances, as happened, and this did happen on 9/11 in 2001, after the attacks of 9/11, there was a national depression. that occurred. People felt out of control. They felt that wasn't supposed to happen here. I mean, there's no reason why it shouldn't happen here, but when it did, it really shocked people. And we saw a collective depression coming out of it, a collective burnout of like, wow, geez. And we also saw it in things when, you know, the issues of police brutality, but also when the priest scandal and, you know, all of these events that have happened, they really struck people to the core. My point is at the beginning of when approaching this election, the depression, which is a disease of motivation, should have resulted in very low turnout. People are like, what does it matter? I'm not going to go vote. Life's shit anyway. And so what happened, however, well, through the advocacy of both parties, was there was a outturning that right now, the number of votes that Biden got and the number of votes that Trump got are the two top numbers of any election in the history of the United States, because they just motivated. And this is remarkable. This is remarkable to consider when you're looking at things like systemic stress that we've had, all of these things going on. So in my Dr. K psycho battle, I have a video that I did on stress fatigue, which is when we get burned out of life. And so I'll find that and I'll go and post it in there. You can watch a little 10-minute video on that stuff. And how it affects a little bit here on how ongoing stress, when we are stressed and we go into that fight or flight mechanism, that inhibits our immune system over time, and chronic stress can lead to chronic illness. And then here's a little bit here about stress and the galvanic skin response, and which this is in here because this was formerly the lab for this, where we got everybody. Galvanic skin response is a measure of the electrical conductivity on your skin. And when you sweat, the electrical conductivity of your skin is accentuated. It's faster. Electrical activity will travel faster. So you just hook up 2 electrodes and you can measure a person's arousal level is what it is, but how excited they are, how nervous they are. And it's used in lie detector tests, and it's used to measure emotional response. And in the original lab, if we were able to meet together, the machine that we have doesn't allow us to do this, but the machines that I have in my lab allowed us to measure galvanic skin response. And I had virtual reality glasses so you could go on roller coaster rides and measure your GSR. And it was actually pretty. Then there was the other experiment we did had to do with, it was a virtual reality haunted house where things jump out at you and stuff like that. And we were able to actually kind of measure some changes. Some people were like cool as cucumbers all the time. You know, they knew it was virtual reality, but some people, the roller coaster one was actually probably made you sick more than it made you scared, but it was pretty wild. So that's why I kind of go into that here. We have a different lab now. And as we head into these discussions in the quiz here, I want you to discuss the experience between stress and your immune system. Any experiences that you've had, you know, during a particular stressful time in your life that you got sick, you ended up getting sick, and you think that might have had something to do with it, or maybe even each one of you, all of us, the shared experience that we're having right now is tremendously stressful with the way we're doing school and everything else that's going on. Even with the ending of the election, it's not over, and it's, you know, we're still going to be hearing about it. And yet, maybe what are we doing to make sure we're eating enough, drinking enough water, drinking enough water, and getting enough sleep, what are we doing? Because we recognize that it's important to do stress management in order to successfully navigate stressful times. And then for chapter 12, what I want you to do, and this is gonna take some critical thinking, is to think back to and go back and think about the dorsal and ventral pathways in our visual system. Pick a emotional situation. It doesn't have to be a bear in the woods. It can be seeing a person you haven't seen for a long time and you're overjoyed to see them. And it could be anything like that. Trace the visual pathway again, and then looking at the parts of the brain, connect that to the theory of emotion that you saw. So you look at the ventral pathway as where the parts of the brain that are being stimulated there, and then look at the amygdala and hippocampus and what roles they would play, and kind of tie that all together in terms of what parts of the brain were involved in creating that emotional experience, and then looking at those theories and saying, well, what I think is really went on is this theory is the one that, these two systems were happening at the same time, and that's why I had this emotional response. There's no right answer here. This is a gray area. It's just a matter of being able to take that physiology, describe the physiology, both the visual pathways and the emotional structures and how they're involved, and then make that connection to a theory. Any one of them doesn't matter. As long as you logically make that connection to the other theory, it's just an exercise in bringing that biology into connection with a theory that's describing emotional experience. How does that sound? Okay, I need to, any questions about any of that?
Nope.
Okay, let's take a look at the lab. This is posted posted now. Chapter 12 lab. Let me go to full screen here. Do you see that? Okay, so chapter 12 lab. We're looking to measure, again, we have just a limited device, so we're going to measure emotion as it's expressed. One of the organs that expresses or that we notice is going on when we have emotional responses is our heart rate. And we have a device, which can measure heart rate and very, very accurately. So, and the experience that I'm going to put you through come from a study that I did last spring in the research methods class, and we may do it again, which is actually a replication of the study I did as a senior in my bachelor's degree, where I thought it was really fun, and it was looking at music and how it affects our mood. And of course, we all know that, we know intuitively that music is when they talk about movements within a orchestra, it's literally, it has emotion as the root concept in that. And the numerous studies done on the brilliance of composers who use music to set the mood within movies. And if you actually watched a movie scene and you could take away the music, it'd be like, what is going on? It's amazing how important that music track is. And of course, just listening to music and upbeat or not. Now, in my original study, I won the informal most outrageous name for a study contest that we had going on in the honors program that I had in the school I was at, and I got the award for that because the name of my study was the effect of pre-rated familiar and unfamiliar and pre-rated stimulating and sedative music samples on mood state as measured by Catel's mood state questionnaire. I can still remember that. That's 1983. Woo, 87. Sorry, 83 is high school. 87, I did that. And so what I did is I from my own music collection, I actually had students come in and they had a lab to do this, and I would play music and they would rate it, whether it was familiar or unfamiliar, and then sedative or non, stimulating music. And so I was able to divide my samples into 4 categories, a 2x2 design in my study, where there was one set of music that was familiar and sedative and another set of music that was familiar and stimulating. And then one was unfamiliar, sedative, unfamiliar, stimulating. I would take a mood state questionnaire that had an A part and a B part, and they would take the A part, later, the second part of the study was I'd have people come in, they'd take the A part, where are they right now, and then I would expose them to one of those categories. I had 4 groups, and then they would take the B part, and I would measure how much their emotion changed because they listened to that piece of music. Now, I replicated that study in the class, and we worked together on analyzing that data. It kind of went okay. There was not a whole lot of people participated, but I ended up with these music samples. So I'm going to use them with you in this study, but we're only going to listen to 2 of them. And the way the experiment's going to work is you go into the Lab Scribe software, you go to settings, and then heart, and then ECG rest exercise. This is an experiment within the software that's really supposed to measure heart rate. It's designed to measure heart rate from a resting state, and then do jumping jacks and see what happens. But instead of doing jumping jacks, we're going to listen to music. And so when you conduct the exercise, when you have the data, the first time you're going to sit there for 5 minutes. The first part, you're going to be hooked up, and this is on your body. You have 3 electrodes, and the software shows you where to put them to get your ECG, electrocardiogram. You're measuring your heart rate just like you would if you went to the hospital. And the software shows you how, the instructions that come with the software show you how to measure your R wave amplitude, your beat period, your PR interval, QT interval, TP interval, and average heart rate. Get all that data. It's just placing those red lines, just like we did before, and the way they label the actual heart rate, the different peaks and valleys of your heart. And then what you're going to do is you're going to have a base rate of what those values are, and then you're going to listen to one of the music samples. And during that music sample, they're 9 or 10 minutes long, you're going to record your heart rate, and you're going to repeat those measures. And then you're going to wait 10 minutes, get yourself back to normal, and then do the other sample, 9, 10 minutes. And then you have three sets of data of R wave, beat period, PR interval, QT interval, TP interval, and average heart rate on a table. One is before, then one is music sample number 1, and one is music sample number 2. And then look at the difference, see if there's any differences that exist, and just talk about those differences. I noticed my PR interval. You don't need to know what PR interval really stands for, just that it's different, and that you recognize that there is this difference between 1 or 2 of those 3. This is just visual. I'm not asking you to do statistics. I'm not asking you to do any comparison between these, just looking and see if there's differences, and just practice the idea of setting up and finding this information. That's part of what this is about, is to get you to find this. And we will likely do something similar to this when we get into research methods as an example of a study. So it's kind of getting you ready for measuring heart rate and getting all of these pieces. So we'll have that. So you create a table and then 1 to 2 paragraphs explaining it. So in the in Brightspace, I have, this is chapter 12. This is what you see. And of course we have the discussion there and the quiz. And then this is the lab instructions. You click on that, it opens up the thing that I just showed you right there. Then you go down, scroll down a little bit more, and then you have 2 videos. One is familiar sedative and one is unfamiliar stimulating. In my study, those were the most, those are the most opposite, they had the most effect on emotional state. So you're going to listen to those, and then that's where you submit. And these just open up. I click that. It opens up, like, and you start the movie. And it's just put the headphones on, and this is all it is. There's no pictures to go along with. This is going to fade out. And then you just, the music starts and you have your headphones on, close your eyes. I don't know if you hear that or not. So that's the beginning of the familiar sedative one. So it's just kind of just putting yourself through that. So you've done, the lab is important to have the baseline, and then what your heart's doing after, you know, during the sedative part, and what your heart's doing during the stimulating part. And then just a light discussion about that, about, you know, this is what I'm observing. There were differences, there were no differences, any sort of commentary at the end. Again, it's more important for me that you learn how to get those values following the instructions that are in the lab, which will pop up, you know, when you go to the settings in that lab software, the instructions pop up in your web browser. And that's where it'll teach you how to get each one of those settings, and it will show the labels, what those letters mean and what parts of the wave they're actually trying to measure. So you might want to play around with that before you even do the experiment. You know, just hook yourself up and just record your heart rate and just see about how you can interpret the line graph that you get out of that. Okay, so that's our exploration of emotion. A very appropriate question for me to ask right now is, how are you feeling about all this?
Oh, it doesn't seem too bad.
Yeah, not too bad.
Not too bad.
Just a little bad. Just a little bad.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all
Yeah.
right. Should be good.
What about you, Jaden?
All right.
Okay. All right. School's not supposed to be easy. Life is not supposed to be easy.
Right.
As they say.
Right.
What do you say? What do you say? 10 years
Sure
from now,
isn't.
you'll be laughing about this 10 years from now. Okay, so let's see. I am going to probably tomorrow, I'm going to record the videos for stats, because we're not meeting for stats, and we're going to see how that goes. I'm open to commentary and like, wow, Mark, I think we need to maybe talk about this or whatever. But I mean, most of the time it's just been me talking anyway, so you might as well watch it at your convenience instead of mine.
You're
So,
not wrong.
it's like, hey, that works. Any questions about any of this right now? Or are we good? Good to call it a day, or?
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm good.
You're good? Okay. So I look forward to seeing those with you, and enjoy those little music samples. The stimulating one, I'm going to tell you, I didn't think it was that stimulating, but that's what people gave me. The ones that I had in my original study were like heavy metal. And
No.
they were bizarre. They were bizarre things from my record collection. In fact, I had songs from the solo album of Queen's drummer. People don't even know who Queen's drummer was, and he had a solo album, and he had stuff that was like totally outrageous that nobody knew about. And it was, so we'll see. We'll see. All right. So I'll talk to you folks later. I'll be posting this recording, so Ashley can enjoy it too. So everybody say hi to Ashley.
Hi, Ashley.
All right. So I'll see you folks on, I'll see you virtually. You'll see me on Wednesday.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Have a good break.